the Soo Line. So the Soo Line Railroad is the primary United States Railroad subsidiary of the CANPAC, or the Canadian Pacific Railway, one of 7 U.S. Class 1 railways controlled through the Soo Line Corporation. Although it is named for the Minneapolis-St. Paul and Sault Ste. Marie Railroad, which was commonly known as the Soo Line after the phonetic spelling of salt. It was formed in 1961 by the consolidation of that company with 2 other CP, or CANPAC subsidiaries, the Duluth, South Shore and Atlantic Railroad, and Wisconsin Central Railroad. So that's what this is. So the Soo Line is a train game set in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. As in many such games, the players invest in railroad companies, building track to increase the company's income and paying dividends to the shareholders. And as in several of Tom Russell's railroad games, track leasing and cooperation is required to get past high build costs, strict hex limits, and tight cube supplies. Now, when you hear cooperation, this is very much not a co-op. Keep that in mind. Here's the thing, though. This is a weird game. For one thing, there is only 3 railroads to invest in, and the majority shareholder makes all decisions when a company operates. This means that when playing with 4 or 5 as we are tonight, some players will not be running companies themselves and will need to rely on savvy investments to stay competitive. Included in these investments are the 5 private companies. Privates are seated with goods at the start of the game and pay a fixed income each round, and each time a railroad delivers goods. Once their goods are gone, the private closes and the owner derives no further benefit from the company. If a railroad withholds money instead of paying dividends, its share value drops, sometimes dramatically. Given enough time, the stock values for all 3 railroads will tank. The trick is to end the game before this happens and when you have the most valuable portfolio. As is usually the case with these kind of things, the winner is the player with the most money, which is cash on hand plus the value of your stocks. Note, no play money is provided if you don't have poker chips. Greenbacks will do in a pinch, and it makes the game very interesting. However, as you can see, we've chosen to go the less volatile, less violent version of poker chips. Oh, and also there's a cat on the priority deal. So there we go. That's the back of the box. So what are you guys looking at? Well, on the main board, it's the hexes here represent the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. There are 4 types of hexes. There are easy or rural green hexes, as you can see. I do want to point out that there's an easy to miss green hex right here. There are also brown mountain hexes, as you can see, that are depicted with the, well, mountains on them. Then there are urban and city hexes, which are these white city hexes, as you can see. And then there are white hexes with a red border around them. These are destinations. There's a destination 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I think that's all of them. Yes, those are the 5 destinations. All the other cities are just regular cities, as you see. There are 3 different tracks on the main board. The top one is the stock value track that is going to track the value for the 3 companies that are in the game, the Soo, the CNW, and the DOSA. And these cubes will be moving up and down this track dramatically as the game goes on. Then below that, there is an income track for paying out dividends, and each company starts either paying at $2 or $3 respectively. Then there is a bonus track which tracks payouts from private companies, but also is the main timer of the game. There are, as I mentioned, the 3 companies. There are certificates for each of the 3 companies, and there are cubes which represent track when placed out here on the main board, some of which are already out here. And then we also have tracker cubes up there. We have the Soo Line, the CNW, which I believe is the Chicago Northwest Railway, and DOSA, which is the Duluth South Shore Atlantic Company. Then over on the left-hand side, randomly distributed, as you can see on the left side of the board there, we have the private companies as well as the quote-unquote presidential companies over there with the stars on them, or the president's certs, if you will. And of course, there is the priority deal, which we will randomize as the round, or as the game begins, okay? All right, so how do you actually play the game, and what's the point? Well, a game of the Soo Line begins with a one-time auction round where the private companies are auctioned off and the initial presidencies of each of the 3 companies are going to be auctioned off. Now, these are randomly distributed as far as the order in which they came out. All of these 8 will be auctioned at the beginning of the game, and the order in which they get auctioned changes every game. After that, each of the indeterminate number of rounds follows the same sequence that is an alternating set of operating rounds where the 3 companies will operate always left to right, meaning the Soo, then the CNW, then the DOSA. And then after that, we will go into a stock round where players may invest in one of these 3 companies. This continues in perpetuity until the game ends. As I mentioned on the back of the box, or as was mentioned on the back of the box, the goal of the game is to have the most valuable portfolio of shares of the various companies, and added to that, your cash on hand. Players are going to be investing in these companies, and the president of each company will make the decisions for each of those companies, and those decisions include which deliveries they're going to make to these various destinations out here, moving goods from the private companies to the destinations, then building track, and finally deciding whether or not to pay dividends to the shareholders or to withhold to build up the company coffers to then build more rail and hopefully pay dividends in the future. These decisions will help shape both the speed of the game as well as the story that the game itself tells. The alternating operating rounds and stock rounds will continue until one of 3 things triggers the end of the game. If there are no spaces left on the bonus track here, every time a delivery is made to one of these destinations, that delivery cube will end up on this bonus track. Once that is full, that will trigger the end of the game. We will finish the operating round, and then we'll go into final scoring, if you will. Or if a railroad's company share value reaches 80. So if one of them makes it there, congratulations. This is going to be usually how the game ends. And lastly, if all 3 companies' cubes have all been exhausted, all of their supplies, meaning all of their cubes are out here on the board, that also will trigger the end of the game. All right, so that's basically an overview of how the game works, but now let's go into the details, okay? So there's an auction round, as I mentioned. After that, there will be a set of operating rounds in which each company will operate, and it's actually laid out right here what will happen. There will be a minimum 1 delivery, if possible, possibly more. Then that company will build track. Then it will have to decide whether to pay dividends or withhold. We'll do that for the Soo, the CNW, and the DOSA. Then after that, we will go into a stock round. Again, all this is laid out here. The stock round is then buying stock or passing, and then moving back into an operating round, okay? So we'll start off by talking about the initial auction. The initial auction is going to start with whoever has the priority deal. The minimum bid is $5. It will start with the top company, the company being the private company or the railroad, whichever one is on the top, minimum bid being $5. At that point, it is a once-around auction, meaning whoever has the priority deal, then here, then there, then there, then there. You either up the bid or pass. Once you pass, you're out. So if I start the bid at $5, it's incremental in dollar or however many jumps. Everyone starts with 25 bucks. So if I start the bidding at 5, Jess says 8, Alan says 12, Martin passes, and it comes to Andrew. Andrew says 15. I now have a decision as the priority deal maker. I can either, or priority deal holder, I can either allow Andrew to pay his 15 to purchase that company, or I can match it, stealing that bid, paying $15, and then taking the company for myself. If I so do, all of the private companies, so all of the mines and the lumber companies, will pay their money to the CNW's coffers, as you can see here. If I stole that from Andrew, he becomes the priority deal. Whoever the last one to have it outbid or stolen from him, I will take the mine itself. It's a terrible thing to waste. I now own that. Boom. Then we go into an auction for the next company, be it one of the railroad companies, presidencies, or the minor company. Starting with the priority deal, minimum bid $5. If for whatever reason Andrew does not have $5, he is allowed to bid less up to what he has. If he only has $3, starting bid maybe $3. However, he cannot use the priority deal to then steal that company from the highest bidder, provided nobody, if he bid it $1, the highest bid were $3, he couldn't use the priority deal to steal it. Does that make sense? Now, when we get to a railroad company, you're getting one share of that railroad company. So a few things are going to happen if that happens. Whatever the bid is going into the company coffers, and the company or the bank, which is off screen, will then match the bid for that company and put it into the company coffers. So if the winning bid for the CNW was 15, whoever it was would pay the 15 to the company coffers. The bank would match that with $15 from the company coffers there, and then all that money would go into like so. And then again, if a player is outbid, the last player that was outbid gets the priority deal marker. And if nobody is outbid, then the priority deal would stay there. Okay? And we do that for all of the companies. Any questions on that?
Nope.
The first of the miners, the privates, will get 1 delivery cube. So you'll notice that the Adventure Mine has 1, where the last one, the Quincy Mine, will get 3, and every other one that falls in between will get 2, as you can see there. And again, the distribution of all of those is random. One other thing that I should point out, that when a company, whatever the actual bid is, if it were at $15, it will be tracked here, the initial share value for up to that value, the 1. If it were 16, it would go to the 16. If it were 12, 13, 14, or 15, it would go to the 12, etc., etc. And there, we would go through all 8 of the companies. Any questions on the initial auction?
Nope.
The rules do state that at no point should you allow 1 player to get 3 privates. Trust me when I say it tells the truth. Don't let that happen. Because if so, concede the game to that player, congrats, and start over. In addition to that, it suggests that no player should have 2 privates whose payouts exceed $13. The payouts are between $5 and $9. So nobody should have, say, the 9 and the 7. It gives them a huge benefit, is basically what the rules say. All right, so there you go. Any questions? That's the initial auction. We keep going around, starting with the priority deal until all 8 companies are out. Easy enough. So now let's go ahead and move into operations. So it starts out with the delivery. I'm going to double back to that after we talk about building track. Okay, so building track is very simple. A company has whatever it has in its company coffers in which to build track. Now, here in our example, the CNW has $45. The cost of building is as shown here. All mountains cost $20 to lay a track being 1 cube. Everything else, and I do mean everything else, costs $10, whether it's a easy or a rural hex, a city hex, or a destination hex, all cost $10. So as you can see here, all these star spaces are where red track starts. So red starts on all of those. It can then branch out from any of its track there to go and build. It can build anywhere between 0 and however many cubes it has, up to what its portfolio or its coffers can afford. So in this case, maybe they choose to build, say, $20 worth of track. That would be 10. That would be 20. The 20 would go into the bank, and that would be the track build for the CNW. Okay, but let's indulge and let's say it had spent $40 to do so, like there. So there, it built its track, etc., etc. Then it goes into dividends. To be able to pay out a dividend, a company must have built at least 1 track. So if it chose to build no track, it cannot pay a dividend. But I did build track as the president of the CNW. I would have the share in front of me. Then I choose to pay dividends. If I choose to pay dividends, every shareholder would get wherever the dividend marker is. Now, when I built this track, I should also point out that every time you build track into a city, its income will go up 1. If it builds into a destination, it will go up 2. But as it is, I built into 2 cities, so my income would move up 2 jumps. So if I choose to pay dividends, that money comes from the bank, not from the company coffers. For every share anybody owns, $4. Shares in the company do not pay to the company. It's only to shareholders. So it'd be $4 a piece on that. Any questions there?
Nope.
If I choose not to pay any dividends, I can do so as the president. What happens then? Add a 0 to whatever that number is, and the company gets that amount of money into the company coffers from the bank. For being $40, we would get $40 into the company coffers as such. But then the bad news happens. For every share issued or sold, and there are a total of 5 CNWs, but only 1 would have been sold to begin with, I would have that, the company value or the stock value would decrease 1 per share owned by players. But let's indulge and let's say 3 of the shares had been owned. It started here, it would drop 1, 2, 3 drops because I chose to not pay dividends. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
All right. Now, when we double back and it becomes the next operating round and the CNW can operate, then we go into deliveries, which deliveries again happen first at the beginning of a company's operating round. If a company has a cube in a city that shows that it is the home of one of the private companies, and it has a cube in a destination city, it may make a delivery. And I will say that it must make 1 delivery if possible. If it were built out as such, to where it were something along the lines of like so, and like so, you'll notice that we actually have the ability to make 2 deliveries now. We have 2 starting cities or 2 starting locations for private companies, and we have 2 separate destinations. I can then make 2 deliveries if I wish. 1 for this company, 1 for this company, going to their respective destinations. Does not matter which is which, it's not tracked anywhere, but to be able to make 2 deliveries, 2 different companies, a minimum of 2 different destinations. But I am only obligated to make 1 delivery. But let's say I make the 1 delivery to the Jackson Mine, that will come over here. The Jackson Mine, you'll see, shows a value of $5. Whoever owns that private will get $5 from the bank. So in this case, let's say it were Martin, he would get $5 from the bank. Then the company itself will get $5 to it for making the delivery. Let's say it's another later turn and it's the beginning of the round, makes another delivery for the Jackson Mine. Same thing would happen, $5 for Martin, $5 for the company, but you'll notice that's the last delivery for that company. By doing so, that company now will close. But on its way out the door, it's going to pay a bonus dividend to the owner of that company, which is the furthest left visible value. So if, let's say that had already been there and the Jackson Mine just delivered, it would be $10 to the owner of the Jackson Mine, which in this case would be Martin. He would get $10. Then the Jackson Mine would then flip over and be removed from the game, never to have another delivery and never to pay another dividend to the shareholder or to the company owner. One other thing I failed to mention, I apologize, at the beginning of every operating round, pay the privates. Just like in 18XX, forget that every time. Pay the privates, meaning whatever that value is, all the owner of the privates get that amount of money. I apologize, I overlooked that. But that's how a delivery works. Now, it is possible, and let's talk one more thing about building track, which is leasing track and where you're allowed to build track. Multiple companies can be in cities and destination cities, but only one company can be in a rural or a mountain hex. So what does that mean? The yellow company, the DOSA here, cannot build into that hex because that is an easy or a rural hex. They could build there and then build into Gwyn if they so desired. But in lieu of that, they can lease track. So let's talk about leasing track. Leasing track says, and there is some amount of money, I assume, in the DOSA, they want to build all the way into Iron Mountain. To do so, they want to lease a little bit of track. So instead of building here and costing themselves $10, they choose to lease this track to be able to give them access to the city. So they lease this track for half the value of whatever that track would normally cost. So it would normally cost $10 to build that. Instead, it costs $5. They take $5 from their coffers, pay that into the company they're leasing from, and then they can continue building. Then they would pay $10 and move into Gwyn. And then at that point, they then can continue building track, $10, $10, and finally $10 for a total of $30 back into the bank, like so. So they leased that one track. They could lease this one to get down into Escanaba if they wished, and they could further lease other track. In fact, what they could do, which might not be smart, but conceivably what they could do, is they could lease this track, build into Gwyn, lease this track paying another $5 and go into Escanaba. Then they could lease this, and make it, and so they would pay 5, 10, 15, and then another 10 to the bank to get down here. Then they could then lease 5, 10, 15, and another 10 to the bank to then build in there. And they might do so to reserve some cubes and to give themselves a little bit of more flexibility. Costs a lot more money to go that route, but I'm just showing as an example what they could do. Does that make sense?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right. When it comes to deliveries, let's work it out. One more example. Let's say it were like this. Red, on their turn, after we've paid the privates, wants to do a delivery and chooses to do a delivery from the Van Winkle and Montague lumber all the way to Iron Mountain, or all the way down, to Iron Mountain, let's say, for whatever reason. Bad example, just indulge me. Here, this would go over, it would close, they would get the payouts just like normal, and the value would jump up for making the delivery like normal. But because they use lease track or track that is owned by another company, both companies' values will go up for the delivery. However, the payouts would only go to the red company because they're the ones actually making the delivery, as well as the private company that actually made the delivery. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. So that is building track, leasing track, paying dividends or not. Any questions on operating rounds?
Nope.
Going into a stock round, very simple. You can buy one share of stock based on whatever the value is of the stock. You pay into the bank, the company, or the bank does, or you pay into the company, the bank does not match. And for every share sold, the value goes up 1. Or instead, and it is a once around action starting with a priority deal, or you can pass. When you pass, you get $5 from the bank, and if you were the first player to pass, you also get the priority deal marker. After everyone has taken one action, we go into an operating round and you pay the privates and do it all over again until either this bonus track is filled up, a company reaches 80, or all of the cubes are used up. At that point, everyone sells their shares back to the bank for whatever the share value is per share, plus any cash they have on hand. Whoever has the most money wins. Important reminder, if you don't pay dividends, your share value will go down 1 per share that is owned by players. Good luck and Godspeed. Any questions?
No.
All right. And the other thing I didn't make an example of, a good has to go the shortest delivery possible. Okay? So In other words, it could not come down this way and go there to completely remove yellow from getting the piggybacking on the delivery. It could not go this way. It would have to go the shortest route, which would include the yellow cubes in that regard. That's the edge case. But other than that, let's get started. You all ready? Good. All right.